Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, founder and president of the Pixel Project, and I'm moderating the 7th Google Hangout session of the 5th fall edition of the Read for Pixels campaign. Now, through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 15 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. And also to reveal the first mystery celebrity male role model portrait in our celebrity male role model pixel reveal campaign. We'll be telling you a little more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project and what you can do to stop violence against women by visiting our website at www.thepixelproject.net. Now, we have a very special guest today. We're having a live discussion and Q&A session with the science fiction and fantasy author, Julie Czerneda, who is published by Daw Books. The former biologist is an award-winning pioneer in science fiction in the classroom, scientific literacy, and a proponent of non-traditional careers for women. And out this fall, The Only Thing to Fear, and Search Image, which is the next installment in Essence Adventures. And it'll be followed by an anthology set in her Clan Chronicle series, Tales from Plexus. And you can find out more if you go to www.czerneda.com. I'm going to put Julie on screen so Julie can do a little show and tell. Here we go. Hey, Julie.
Hey, hi, Regina. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so welcome to Read for Pixels, and let's talk about treats. So you have generously donated 3 lovely treats to the stash of author goodies that we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels fundraising page. Now, the first one is a set of the Reunification trilogy plus a set of handmade bookmarks by you and a handwritten thank you note from you. And we would like to give Michelle Mitchell in the USA a huge, great, big thank you for donating $150 to get the Reunification bundle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah. And your second bundle is it's a very special one because it's not even out yet, the book. It's the first edition hardcover of your latest book, Search Image, featuring the ever-lovable alien Essen. That's not the actual book,
but it's in print. There's words.
Yeah. And there's the bust that the artist sent you, right? Is that of Essen?
Yeah. Well, no, it's actually of Ursh. There's on the cover. There's this is all decorated with jewelry and beads and all kinds of things on it. On the cover of the book, this is actually called Phil, and Matt Stawicki crafted him in order to get all the details that I was after for the alien face, and he did such a good job, and then he sent it to me. I mean, how cool is that? And I would love to share that with someone, but I actually can't. I'm keeping it, but I wanted to show you, Phil.
Well, the bundle is the first edition. I think it must be first printing too, because it'll be
absolutely fresh off the press.
Yeah, so it's first edition, first printing, hardcover of Search Image, and includes a set of handmade bookmarks.
Yes.
Yeah. And you get a choice of them, but it's first come, first served. So
it is.
Michelle will get the first choice, I think, because she got the other bundle first.
Did you want me to show the bookmarks?
Yeah, show the bookmarks.
Sure. Okay, well, these were featuring art by Matt Stawicki, but the design is by my husband, Roger, who is featured in Anne Bishop's other series. Yes, that's the Roger Czerneda you know and love. So this is the one from A Play of Shadow, and I don't have very many left of these at all. So once they're done, they're done. Then there's 3 from A Turn of Light, again by Roger. And then last but not least, a very special set that includes, they've got a little bit of bling I put on them just to make them even more fun. And I just had a few of these left. So there's the key for the first book. there's the lock for the second one, and then there's a lovely Swarovski crystal on the scary one with the hands. So there's 3 sets.
Yeah. So if you want to get a choice, guys, just head on over to our fundraising page, and we'll share the link with you a little later. And Anusha is probably sharing it in the chat box right now.
Awesome.
So if you want that, just go in and donate. Fulfill the donation request, and you'll get it. And there's one more perk, one more treat from Julie. It's a really, really special Tuckerization perk. And you know how Julie, you know how Tuckerization perks are usually just naming a minor character and maybe including some of the um, some of donors' physical features, but this is a Tuckerization perk with a twist. Can you tell us about that little twist?
The little twist is that you can decide if you're going to be acting on the behalf of good or evil, which means you get to decide if you have a noble death or a suitable comeuppance. You can also give me a character quirk that I will work into the story for you. And you'll get to read that first, and we'll be collaborating on this. And I think it'll be a lot of fun for someone and for me.
And it's gonna be and there is a definitive date in which the donor and the book will appear. That would be next August, right?
Yes, it comes out in August, probably the first Tuesday of August.
Yeah, and the book is called The Gossamer Mage.
Yes, I'm working on it right now. Well, not right now, but I will be working on it after we talk.
So, just a quick note to everybody, just a reminder that all books, as normal for Read for Pixels fundraiser goodies, all books will be signed and personalized by Julie, by the author Julie. This will be Julie, and it'll be sent to donors. For Julie's bundles will be sent to donors wherever they are in the world. So it's not restricted to U.S. donors only. Julie and Doll Books have very generously offered to send it to anywhere in the world. Just make sure you have a working mailing address, please, because we don't want any boomerangs back. So there are just 2 treats left for Julie now, so go get them before they vamoose. And please generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women and girls. And now, Julie, you have something to read for us for the next 10 minutes, I believe.
I do indeed. I do. Hang on one second. Sorry. For those who didn't follow me on Twitter today, I actually developed a lovely head cold yesterday, and so I'm going to sniffle every once in a while. You can, put up with that. So for this, I was trying to figure out which character I would read about, which female character. And I asked my readers actually online, and they all came back with it has to be Mac, unless it was a character from my fantasy. But I agreed with the Mackenzie Connor. She's actually the character in the picture. She's a salmon researcher, and she's a very ordinary person. So, starting from chapter 2. Bah! There's no sex in this one either. The offending book sailed over Mac's head, landed with a bounce, then began slithering down the massive curve of rock. She lunged for it, scraping both knees on wet granite in the process, and somehow managed to hook a finger in the carry strap before the book sailed off the rock for the river several meters below. Sitting back, she caught her breath before glowering at M. Now, at last, we have the truth about Dr. Emily Mamani Sarmiento, consummate professional researcher from Venezuela, holder of more academic credentials than I knew existed. She's nothing but a randy teenager. Nice catch. Mac's lips pressed together and then grinned. And she's impossible. Emily tilted the brim of her rain hood just enough to show Mac a raised eyebrow. What I am is stuck on this rock, reduced to watching you, my dear Dr. Mackenzie Connor, also holder of innumerable awards that don't pay rent, chase lousy books that have no sex in them. Remind me again why I agreed to such suffering. Huh. Max snorted and got busy sorting through their pile of waterproof bags for one to protect the latest of Emily's rejects. Lee would not be pleased to find a member of his novel collection soaked in non-functional. There was the one from the sandwiches, consumed hours past. She shook the bag and the book to remove most of the raindrops before unzipping the one to shove in the other. Pardon me. Mac made sure the bag was securely wedged in a crevice before turning her attention back to the river. She tucked her throbbing knees against her chest and put her chin on a spot that seemed unscraped, her rain cape channeling the warm drizzle into tiny rivulets that converged on her bare feet, and she wiggled her toes, playing in the water. I don't see why there has to be sex in everything you read. Her eyes swept the heave of dark water below with the patience of experience. She could relax now. They delayed at base for 2 days, not one, while Emily fussed over her equipment, settled into her quarters, and charmed her newest students. Mac's anxious complaints hadn't hurried her fellow scientists in the least. Hard now to complain about Emily's lack of speed, however, after 5 days with no sign of salmon. Em had been insufferably smug the first day, bored and smug the second, simply bored by the third. Mac was rather enjoying her discomfort. And I don't see why it has to rain here every hour of the day, that worthy countered imperturbably. This is worse than the Amazon. A bright little head suddenly popped out of the river depth, patterned in bold white and rich chestnut. The harlequin duck bobbed for an instant in the middle of the maelstrom, the water's froth seeming to entertain it, then dove again, seeking its prey. Max smiled to herself. The sun was out this morning, she reminded Emily. Oh, was that the sun? Tell my sleeping bag, which for your information barely achieved damp before we had to haul the gear back in the tents. A rustle of synth rubber as Emily came to sit beside her. With their hoods and capes, the two of them, Mac decided, must look like small yellow tents themselves. Emily was quiet for about 30 seconds. And how long before they get here? When we see them. Right there. Mac pointed downstream where the river wrapped itself around a wall of rock and disappeared. Below their toes and the generous outcrop of granite beneath them, the Tanu River was over 40 meters wide, in its mid-reach already swollen, powerful, and swift as it sped down the west side of the Rockies to the Pacific coast. Along its surface, mist competed with the unceasing rain, some tossed where the river did its utmost to dislodge boulders and tumble gravel, some curling up along eddies where ice-cold glacial meltwater met the warm, saturated late August air. The river always won. It had carved the sides of its valley into downward sheets of sheer rock, anchored at their base by the lushness of rainforest, itself a thin line of green stitched to the water's edge by the pale gray of fallen trunks. The river's edge was a perilous place to grow. Yet grow here life did, with a tenacity and determination Mac had long ago taken as personal inspiration. Cloud clung to the forest. The forest clung to any non-vertical surface lining cliff top and valley floor. And where trees couldn't survive, lichens and mosses latched themselves to rock face and crevice, nourishing the mountain goats who danced along perpendicular cliffs. The mountain's relentless push skyward added force to the river, and the river gladly tore at the mountain. Life thrived in the midst of geological conflict, and it was, Mac firmly believed, the most wonderful place on earth. And the ideal location for Field Station 6. I don't think it will be much longer, Em, she reassured her, relenting. This afternoon, if I'm a judge. What Emily muttered to that was too low to compete with the river. Its thunder overwhelmed the rustle of leaves in the trees and the beat of rain on their gear. Waterfalls merely underscored its voice wherever the mountains split to add their outflow from the snowpack and glaciers beyond. They'd learned to shout over it. Mac raised her voice. Pardon? I should have taken Canning's offer. Mac turned and stared at her friend. Work with manatees? Whatever for? A grin lit the shadow of the rain hood. At least they copulate. Mac threw up her hands. As I said, you are impossible. Entertaining, but impossible. I do my best. Oh, look! Mac had seen for herself. Both women rose to their feet so quickly they had to grab one another for balance, then push off to race to the consoles attached to the stone. It was a rush to pull the protective sheets, Mac winning. Of course, she had two good arms to use. Her eyes locked on the rising glow of the observation screen as it sparkled through the raindrops. The standby flicker of indicators transformed into a psychedelic polka as data roared in. I'm tracking 35. Make that 240. Make that upward of 5,000. Emily's voice held a hint of excitement. but only a hint. She'd already taken control of the tracer emitters from the autos, an operation demanding intense concentration as well as quick hands. This was her tech, the latest model to be tested away from her original site in the Sargasso Sea with its convenient lack of cliff and forest. Emily had insisted on running extra simulations at base, making adjustments to compensate for slowing of her left arm by the cast, working to speed the reaction time of the equipment and herself. A perfectionist in every way. Mac made sure all the incoming feeds were active, then tore her eyes from the display to look down the river for its source. The Harlequin was looking too. The bird stood on shore with a trio of its kind, as if preferring stone to the uncertain safety of the river, or at the very least, showing disapproval of this novelty. The tracer couldn't harm them, but they'd never seen anything like it before because no one had, Mac thought in triumph. The tracer. It was a translucent curtain made of rainbows and fairy dust, had begun flowing upstream. It started in the air, 3 meters above the water's surface, a distance Mac's surveys had indicated would be above the tallest protruding debris. It stretched from side to side across the valley. Where it met the river's banks, it faded to a shadow that passed lightly over log, stone, and duck. And within the roiling water, it was a wall, moving ever forward. On the screen, that wall sectioned the water column down to the gravel bottom, and invisible below the surface, this version of Emily's device was marked above for the convenience of air breathers. Like the curtain rings, a line of tiny aerial bots formed the tracer's up top edge, each projecting a portion of the field down into the river while obeying directions provided by proximity sensors and Emily, and at the same time they retrieved data and beamed it to the equipment under Mac's rain-damp hands. I see it. The correction was made before the line reached the bend in the valley, the curtain swinging more rapidly at its near reach to compensate. How's it look? Mac ran her fingers over the screen, following the patterns sifting and surging over this display, feeling the cool droplets under her skin as if she stroked what they represented. It's better than sex. You need to get out more. So that's my scientists hard at work in a field.
Yeah, and and ooh, I echoing. So apologies if I continue echoing. Am I okay now? Yes. Okay, so your stories, as can be seen from, as we heard from the excerpt that you read, they effortlessly pass the Bechdel test. And we see quite a few female friendships, complicated as they are, such as the one between Mac and Emily in the Species Imperative trilogy, which you just read from. And this sticks out for us because female friendship isn't usually at the forefront of science fiction and fantasy books. So, what are the challenges of writing female friendships, and why do you think positive takes on female friendship isn't still not very common in science fiction and fantasy?
It should be. I think that's why one of the reasons I kept writing was because that's what I felt the characters should be like. I was very tired of the woman as a token, woman as a victim, woman as the one spot scientist who could do stuff, because that's not my world. I live in I went to school with women. I graduated with women scientists and women and men working in collaboration. Uh, this is this to me is natural. This to me is normal. So when I introduce the alien should stand out. Nothing else. Everything else should be real, and you should care about these people.
Yeah, and your female characters. What strikes me about them, what we're talking about, just before we went on air, is that they are complex and well-rounded. Whether they're human or alien, and they're not afraid to fight for themselves and to buck the system with a winning mix of grit and humor. And most of all, they are normal. I sound so astonished, don't I? Like, wow, when I read your books, it's like, I would react like this. Like, any normal person will react like this. Any normal woman would react the way your characters react to situations. And, who or what inspires you to create these characters? And they stand out in science fiction and fantasy because they're so, again, using that word, air quotes here, normal.
I think it's part of the world building for me. It's when I'm looking at a character, I want to know who they are, where they came from, what their family's like. I don't necessarily go through a step by step process with everyone, but as I write them, they have to come to life for me. And to me, if they don't seem like there's someone that I would, especially a protagonist, someone that I would invite in and sit and want to talk to, I don't want to write them. They're not real. It's not even so much normal as they're not whole to me. I mean, people have families. If they've lost their family, if they're an orphan, that's a significant part of their life, and that actually can inform the entire story. But not every character in a story need be an orphan to be interesting. I think we all step up in our way, and I like to see ordinary, normal people who are happy in their lives forced to, find a moment when they step up and do more than they thought they could. I love those stories.
Yeah, and you know who Mac reminds me of? Agent Scully.
Ah, yeah, yeah, they'd have a lot in common. Yep, yep.
You know, they're sort of like, well, I'm not gonna, the whole attitude is, I'm gonna have to test this first.
Yep.
I to make sure that it actually works as it's gonna work, that it's actually real. And it is, it is wonderful because, they talk about the Scully effect, where, you know, thanks to the X-Files, lots of women and girls have gone into the sciences. Do you hope that you have that sort of effect on the girls who are reading your books?
I hope so. I mean, I have heard from some who more often I hear from students who are reading it when they're in biology and they're going, "This is what I'm planning to do. This is the character. This is the person I want to be," which is really great. It's absolutely wonderful. I think it's also um, I don't know. I just really like the fact that when I wrote Beholder's Eye, for example, friendship was the key. I didn't see stories where a friend was anything more than the person you cared about enough that when the author sacrificed them, you'd get upset. So really, they were just put there like a pet. You see this pretty kitty, you're going to sacrifice it, and then you'll feel bad. I mean, really, friends are far more than that.
Yeah, and I mean, if an author, what would your advice to writers, particularly male writers who want to include female friendships and other platonic or familial female relationships in their books? What would your advice be?
Well, first off, if to look at their own families, I mean, the women in their family and how they interact with them and talk to them. If they would hopefully have female friends. I can't think of any male writer that right now that I can't think that doesn't know lots of women and that like peers to talk to back and forth and just watch what they do. I mean, it's the same for me. I mean, I write male characters and I have to put myself in that head and I write aliens and such forth. So we all have to make that creative leap. But I think no matter who the person is, their gender is one aspect. They still all need to have the people around them they care about, the people around those people who have heard of them and care about them by proxy. We don't live in bubbles.
Yeah, and what is interesting is we've talked to so many authors over the years. I mean, we're welcoming our 100th author by the end of this month. To,
Wow, congratulations.
and what the reason why I asked that question is that, we have had a number of male authors who we interviewed say that, they did, at least at the beginning of their career, writing career, find it tricky or difficult to write female characters.
They worried about getting it wrong. I think that's a natural thing as a writer. I mean, I wrote about a man who had lost his hearing, and I was wanted to be sure I got it right, and I paid attention, and what helped me the most was when I actually blew up my own eardrum, and then I thought, oh, that's what it's like. It's really not good. It's good now, but there's some things that you're so comfortable with because they're your personal experience. You have no doubts, but that's not all you need to write about. You need to write about the things you don't know.
Mhm. So I'm going to pause a little bit, pause for a couple of seconds just to let everyone who's watching know. Hi, if you just joined us, I'm Regina. I'm today's host. And if you have a question for Julie, Julie's here live As you can see, she's on screen and she's live and kicking. And she, despite her head cold, um, if you have questions for Julie, make sure you're logged into YouTube. And once you're logged into YouTube, you can type your questions into the chat box next to the screen. And Anusha, who is today's chat box moderator, say hi, Anusha. She will relay your questions to me to read out to Julie. So pepper Julie with questions. She's here to answer any and all questions that come up today. So let's get back to the discussion while we wait for the questions for fans to appear. Um, so, speaking of the Bechdel test, why do you think so many science fiction and fantasy authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test? I mean, two women talking about something that it's not a man. I mean, there's thousands of millions of things that women talk about that don't concern a man. What can you suggest for authors who want to sort of make sure that they pass the Bechdel test, that they don't fall into the whole, well, the two women are only going to be talking about the male character thing? What would your suggestion be?
Well, they should probably just try writing them as men, perhaps, to start with, because if they then have their men just doing nothing but talking about women, then maybe that's going to just tell them that there's a little bit something about off. Um, and it's lazy writing. I mean, if you're using the women talking about the guy to elevate any kind of romantic tension, that's a pretty lazy way to do it. There's so many other ways. I mean, and then when you do it, it matters. When they do bring up that topic, it's for a significant reason. I mean, we don't just talk about the guys in our life, although I was happily talking with you about my husband earlier, because there was a moment and a point to it. And that was fun, and we had a good time with it. But now we've been talking about this incredibly important issue, and about writing and style of things. And I think, quite frankly, it's lazy. I come from educational publishing, so it was a little easier for me, perhaps, to avoid some of those problems, even though my career started in fiction in '97, because I was already working in that premise of science textbooks had to be accessible and encouraging to both sexes, to every sex, and all across the board. So in my first book, actually, I was very careful not to use the word man. I just used human, and I did it for a reason. And I went through that, and I continued to do that. And it wasn't that I didn't want to go man woman. I just said, in the future we will probably go with female male if we're talking to somebody else who also has got female male dysfemale, who knows what. So it's also your training. If you've come from that background as I did, it was a little easier. But it's also you're making that world up, and if you want to make it interesting and futuristic, use this. This is such an important thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of romantic tension, your books showcase a wide range of male-female relationships. So apart from romantic relationships, there are also some wonderful platonic friendships, like the one between Essen and Peter. And why did you decide to depict these kinds of realistic relationships instead of the romantic conflict typically found in science fiction and fantasy novel, well, more fantasy really, novels that are focused on a female protagonist?
Okay. I did it. I don't even remember now which book it was I read that made me so angry. But I read something in which, again, being a friend wasn't enough. Unless you were in love and with the ultimate idea that you were going to have sexual gratification at the end of this, you would be pair bonded or whatever it was, a relationship had less value. And to me, that is absolutely wrong. Our friendships are the strongest things we have. I am a friend first and foremost with my husband. I am a friend first and foremost with my children. Family is after that. And I felt that that was something so important to do that when I wrote Essen, I wrote the last paragraph first, because the ending of that is exactly what I wanted to say, that she'd found a friend and she would never forget him. And friendship was enough. And I get the odd reader email saying, but I'm saying, no, that is not how it works here. Friendship is more than enough, quite frankly, to die for.
Yeah, and it's the whole, it brings it back to, what brings it back to, for me, is, we have, um when Harry met Sally, and the whole premise that men and women can't ever be friends. But then you look around yourself in your life, and most people have friends of both sexes, non-binary friends, trans friends. Everyone has friends across the entire gender and sexuality spectrum. Sometimes you might or might not know about it, but friendship is what keeps so many of the relationships going.
You'll find it very interesting that one of the things that happened when my book first went out to be, way back when in the 90s, I was sending it out. I had an editor read it, a professional editor in New York, not mine now, who came back and said, I can't believe that, the main character has amnesia. She sneaks herself aboard the other main character's starship, and it's 3 days pass. And she said, I'm sorry, I don't believe 3 days can pass without something going on. There's a man, there's a woman in the same ship. I said, pardon me? Pardon me? So just to satisfy that person, I wrote a scene in the beginning of A Thousand Words for a Stranger where Morgan is apparently coming out of a brothel just so that I can point out that if he wants sex, he can get it any old time he wants. He's a much more elaborate person than that. He's not going to take someone on his ship that's a passenger and a helpless person that he's caring for and immediately assume that's why she's there. And it was those assumptions that I detested then, and I think they're better now, but they're
Mhm.
still there.
Yeah, and the line between consent, and if there are romantic relationships, the line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in fantasy books. And whether it's epic fantasy, urban fantasy, uh, paranormal romance, or even space opera. And do you think this is an issue that writers in the genres have started tackling successfully in recent years?
I hope so. The people that I'm reading, and I have been reading for the past while, those aren't issues. Their characters are nuanced, they're interesting, there's all kinds of wonderful romances happening, but they make sense. They're not, even someone just getting just that sort of frisson of excitement when they see someone that happens in real life, but that doesn't mean then you then pursue them and you go, ah, no, it's just, oh, that was interesting, and it's real. It actually is, and, I just feel like there's so much more to do than just make it these, this is how, Sally met whatever.
Yeah, that brings to mind, Mac and Nick's relationship is kind of like, oh, that's Mac is mostly like, oh, that's interesting, sort of.
Yes. I haven't seen one of those for a while.
And then she and then he gets knocked out. Nick gets knocked out cold, and she gets bundled onto the alien spaceship. That was great.
Oh, thank you, yeah.
Yeah. No romantic relationship or male or romantic tension to sort of ruin the whole. I'm mad that I got bundled onto a spaceship sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, she's got a focus, our Mac. She has priorities.
Do you? I mean, I find your female characters so likable, but do you ever get any pushback? About not having female characters that are not likable or relatable enough? Because we've spoken to other female authors, and they say that sometimes they do get pushback.
Only with 2, and in both cases, it was the same feeling, and it was, at the start of Reap the Wild Wind, the main character, Errol, is, she's just coming into her adulthood, she's making some mistakes, she's self-centered, and you very much could say the same about the character Jen Lynn from my fantasy, A Turn of Light, and I've had a couple of people, not too many, but they would email me and they would say, I like your stuff, but boy, I'm having a hard time getting past this teenager angst. And I said, well, please do you keep going because you've only got about another page. But in that case, I felt it was more that somebody just wanted me to deliver a fully formed, mature character right from the get go. And in both of those books, it was important that that not be the case. And it was, if anything, it was a great effort on my part to create characters, young women on the cusp of adulthood who don't know their place yet. And they're a bit afraid and they're a bit cocky and they've got some their own ideas, but that's what people are like.
Yeah.
But that's the only time. I haven't had any other, except remind me to tell you what my son said.
Oh, okay. Oh, are you going to tell us later or now?
Well, I could tell you now if you like. So our son, wonderful, respectful of women, fabulous young human being. So he just, grabbed my Beholder's Eye when he was old enough to read it. He was going to do a project on it for school. That's my second book. So he read it, and then he came in, and he said, "Mom, all the characters are female. Did you do that on purpose? I mean, I'm trying to relate." And I said, I don't think I did that. So actually being, my bent of mind, I actually went back through the book and I did I hadn't done it intentionally, but I did an exact 50-50 split of character, male, female. It just worked out that way. And then I realized what he meant was all the characters of power were female that he encounters first in the book. And even Paul Rajam, who we encounter, who is going to be in the books for a long time, you encounter him in a very helpless situation, and he's really destitute and needs help. So I guess that's what Scott picked up on. But afterwards, he was quite pleased. But he just said, "This is remarkable. They're all women." I said, "Well, they're just not even human, really."
Right. Let's pause the discussion because we have a question from the audience. Right. So the question is from GGC. She says, "The true nature of the clan rally took me by surprise. Did you plan that from the beginning of the Clan Chronicles series?"
I didn't plan it from the start of the Thousand Words for a Stranger, but I did plan it from the beginning of Reap the Wild Wind. So back in '97, when the first book came out, I knew there'd be something, but I wasn't sure what. But as I was developing the plot for the prequel books, then I knew. So as I wrote Reap, that's where it was all going.
I think you need to push your mic up a little bit. Your mic.
Shall I repeat that? Sorry, my bad. Okay. So I didn't know at the beginning of the trade pack books, A Thousand Words for a Stranger. I just knew that something was going to go on. But just before I started doing Reap the Wild Wind, I did know. So from all of those books, it's threaded throughout. There's just little bits.
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
Okay, so everybody, if you just joined us, I think there's some new people joining us. If you just joined us, welcome to Julie Czerneda's session on Read for Pixels campaign. If you want to ask Julie, please make sure you're logged into YouTube, able to type your questions into the chat box. Anusha Kandasivam is today's chat box moderator. Relay your questions to me and I will read them out to Julie and Julie will answer them in real time. So let's get back to the discussion. So, with your female characters, you portray a wide range of, as with your female characters, you portray a wide range of male characters in your novels and stories. What is striking is that many of them are not violent. They treat women around them with respect, and they resort to non-violent problems. In fact, quite a few of them, like small spoiler for everyone.
You're echoing
Evan's search image. I love that name, Evan Gooseberry. I love that name. Search image and now.
Regina, you're breaking up for me. I don't quite see you. I see you, but you're echoing.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you a bit.
Can you see and hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So Nick Trojanowski.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's Survival. The first book in the Species Imperative trilogy. A few of them actually work as diplomats. So do you think reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways science fiction and fantasy writers can break away from toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Yes, but pardon me. It's the same approach, really, as it is to making women like as real people. Men are real people, and the men that I know, uh, if they had to be violent, it would be upsetting to them forever. That would be a moment in their lives they would never forget. The people in my life who were in the military, that's not something that they deserved respect, but it was a very harrowing experience, and it's not what they wanted to do in life, ever. And I think that that's when I see that in a story, when I see a character like that, I'm thinking, you know, that's not a real person. If it is a real person, it's a person who's so scarred and damaged, they probably won't be surviving my book. Um, but I don't want to write that way. And also, so many problems are far more interesting if you're not trying to hit them over the head with a hammer. You're trying to find a way to make the pieces fit together as they should. And if it takes a little more effort, and I frequently find in my stories, I'd like to compromise. I'd like the ending so nobody gets everything they thought they wanted, but in the end, it's a better ending for all of them. And I think that happens a lot in real life. We do that all the time. I mean, who's going to take the kids to hockey? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? We negotiate with each other on an everyday basis. And it's powerful. Plus, I really like the idea of space diplomats.
Oh yeah, though Nick is not exactly your run-of-the-mill space diplomat, unlike Evan,
Oh no.
right?
No. Evan is quite a different character. He's quite fun.
Where did you come up with that? I have to ask this before we go back into your serious discussion. Where did you come up with? Is there actually a last name Gooseberry?
Yeah. There's all kinds of names, especially if you go over to England. There's all manner of names. I could have picked any. For a little while, I was playing with elderberry, but I thought that was a little bit too much of a mouthful, and gooseberry was just more fun. I just wanted the idea of a name distinctive enough that people would latch onto it and maybe want to keep it, even though they don't have no idea what a gooseberry is. And and it's been eons since people left Earth and into space, but we hang on to things. And I thought, you know what, we're going to hang on to some names too if we can.
Yeah, and when and names matter in fiction and in life. That's why there was a discussion going on about the certain countries having laws whereby parents cannot name their kids truly unusual names that will humiliate them in adult life and on the playground. And when I read the name Evan Gooseberry, is so evocative because you read that name and you think he's not going to be very violent, is he? And then you keep reading, and he goes, "Yeah, he's not. He's like a real diplomat." And we have a remark from the audience and a question from the audience before we go on to the next question in the discussion. Anusha says, I know someone whose last name was actually Rainbow. And the second question from the audience is Kristen Britton asks, Julie, which do you find more complex to write, fantasy or science fiction?
Fantasy. Fantasy is so hard. Fantasy is tough stuff. It is. And of course, Kristen, we all know is makes it look easy with her wonderful Green Rider series.
Yeah. Hey, Kristen. Thanks for joining us today. Yay. We've had Kristen on, actually. Kristen is one of our Read for Pixels authors. We had a session with her earlier, I think last year. And it was great. It was great having her with us. Thanks for joining us today, Kristen. So let's get back to the discussion. So, You're talking about just now. You said, you think that, a really violent character would be someone who's scarred and damaged and really, not very nice to read about. Do you think that eventually the violent alpha male, I'm doing little air quotes here, everyone. You can't see me, but I'm doing the air quotes. The violent alpha male type character would phase out of science fiction and fantasy as cultures worldwide start kicking out toxic masculinity? Or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that will stick around for much longer than expected?
Oh, like the fainting female. Well, I don't think we see too many stories. I rephrase that. The stories that will have them will be very well labeled and packaged. I don't think we'll find them in generally in fiction. I think we'll know what we're getting. That it'll be that story. It'll have that cover, and it'll be very obvious what you're getting, because that's the choice is up to the reader at the end of the day, which books they're going to pick up. In terms of the books that we treasure, that we promote, that we hold to our hearts and share with our friends, I think they will disappear, mostly because there's not a lot to say about them. It's just not. You want everyone, if I may say so, is allowed to have their alpha moment, their moment when they step up and risk themselves or do something braver than they ever thought they could. But I really want them to throw up after, you know.
Okay, this is the first. An author going, I really wanted to throw up after the. But it's normal, right? Like
It is.
you do your 20 seconds of immense courage doing something that might be impossibly terribly dangerous or truly nerve-wracking, and then when nobody's looking, you throw up.
And you just talk to any first responder. I mean, these are her people do heroics on a daily basis, and it takes its toll. I mean, it's if it doesn't, there's something, they need help because it's got to take a toll, and they need help from that too. It's I mean, I love a really good heroic figure. I love Thor. He's one of my favorite characters. But even Thor, every once in a while, loses the hammer, and he sits down and he's upset about things. So fair enough, I can take that.
And you know what you said brings me to mind of what Richard K. Morgan said during his session we had with him last week. And Richard writes very violent books. A lot of people ask us why we have him on as a guest, and the reason for this is this explanation that is given about violence in stories is that his stories always show the consequences of violence. You don't walk away from a knockdown, drag out fight with no bruises, with no psychological effects whatsoever. There are consequences to violence. There are consequences to doing dangerous things. You're
Yes.
not just gonna sort of rubber band back from that to your original psychological state.
Which is true, and yet that could be one scene. It doesn't necessarily. I mean, if I'm going to kill off a character, or if I'm going to have a violent scene, it's something that I lead up to. It's going to be a moment. It's not going to be an unending series of that. Mostly because that's not what I'm like. And I don't think anything can sustain that. I mean, I'm not Grimdark is one reason that I wrote Turn of Light, because I'm sorry, I think that a lot of people living in rural medieval settings probably were pretty happy and made pie. So, I'm not really seeing this. We've all got to take over each other's kingdom right now. But I do like dragons, though, so I did that.
Yeah, and one of the critiques of grimdark, now that you mention it, is that the whole gratuitous violence against women thing in so many grimdark books, and if you talk to historians, they're like, life was a lot more complicated back then. Than women, being chattel and all that. Yes, it's true, but it depends on where they live, what the laws are in that particular country during medieval times. And a lot of women also lived very normal lives. Some of them like spinsters. Spinsters
Yep.
is a term that came from, eh, eh, people mean it as a, say it like it's an insult now. But actually, spinsters were women who did not marry, but they supported themselves with a craft that's very, very difficult to master. And they earned good money. And people got
Yes.
threatened by the fact that they didn't need to get married, and they could earn their own keep, and they could own their own things, and their spindles and things, and people just got, and so it sort of morphed into an insult now for any woman who's not married beyond a certain age. It's
When I was researching A Turn of Light, I used one of my sources was letters written from pioneers here to their families at home. And what they were writing about was the fact that they needed to set up a printing press because they wanted to print little booklets on the plants that they were finding. I mean, these were people who, even if they weren't spinsters, but they had a knowledge and they had a knowledge base and they were prepared to move forward and do it. And that was another thing that was really important to me in the stories is that we don't just sit around doing housework day by day by day. No, you go mad doing that. You find something, some creative outlet, be it whether you're quilting and then talking politics, because quilting bees are hives of politics, or you're a scientist, or you're something else. I mean, we're not just one thing.
Yeah, and the whole division of labor, women in the domestic sphere and men in the public sphere. I can't remember where I read it, but that is quite a recent, like only in the last 2 centuries or something, with the rise of industrialization and the nuclear family. Whereas previously, women and men both worked, and it was seen as normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone worked, everyone earned. Parenting is still a contentious thing because women still did the bulk of parenting, but there weren't many objections to women working.
No.
Um, yeah. So,
And I
okay.
don't see why in the future there would be. I mean, the most valuable resource we have are people. You can't waste people. That's
Mm.
just
And that's what violence against women does. There was a report, I think, back in 2016 that came out, and domestic violence costs the world economy several $billions a year in wasted labor, in health, in public health care. It costs, collectively several billion. I have to look it up. I can't remember offhand, but it is several billion.
staggering. Yep.
A trillion, could be a trillion too, because it's a waste of human resources, isn't it? If half of humanity, or one third, 1 in 3 women and girls, get battered or assaulted or otherwise hurt or maimed or killed, they could have, those who were killed could have been contributing members of society had they lived.
It's true. It is true.
Yeah. So, stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about change. And in your opinion, how can, we're talking about the Scully effect just now, people, women and girls watching X-Files, the girls grow up, a lot of them go into STEM, a lot of them go into sciences and engineering. And, and that's one example. So in your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
One of the things that has always appealed about Star Trek is that it shows a future that when it first came out was almost unimaginable. People didn't have to work for a living. People are just out there exploring. Everyone has assigned roles and tasks because they choose to. I think, especially as science fiction and fantasy writers, we can show a different world than anyone else imagines happening. And we can make it so real and so interesting and so credible that why not becomes the question instead of, oh, that would never happen. And we see science fiction in particular leading the way. We're not futurists, but on the other hand, we talk about things that we want to see happen or that could happen. And there are people reading who are saying, I can do that. I can make that. And it doesn't even have to be a big thing, but just these little incremental things. And if there's no stories out there that make a the case for a better, more interesting future, where's it going to come from? So I think it's not so much a responsibility as it's a golden opportunity for us to do this. We have these people wanting to read our work. Let's show them where the world could go. I mean, am very happy to paint futures in which humanity is everywhere because humans get along really well with everybody.
Hmm.
And that's one of our better skills. So we bartend a lot. We're diplomats and we hang out.
Do you think it's important for influential authors such as yourself, who have read all over the world, to make a conscious effort to include characters in your stories that show readers the importance of respecting women as equals and as human beings?
I wish we were at a point where I could say we do it automatically, but I think it's still something we have to consciously make the effort to do. When I'm writing about the women I know, like science, people working in science, people working in space, it's effortless. When I return to fantasy, I have to be much more aware of the world that I'm building. And so for Turn, it was easy because, Pioneer Life, it was a situation where people work together. And so I've definitely pushed that direction of everyone has a purpose, everyone has a contribution. No one is set aside because of their sex. The one I'm writing now, Gossamer Mage, is I don't want to give the story away, but a little bit of it is that people came to a place with their own roles imagined for the sexes, and because of what they decided, that's what happened. And the powers that be have been sitting back looking at them saying, "What the? What? Why did you choose this? It's your problem. You did this. It doesn't have to be this way." So I'm looking forward to that. It's a technically tricky thing to write, but it's again, it's one of the cases where, as you say, you deliberately make that choice.
Yeah. And you said I mean, you listened to the panel that we had last week about writing violence against women in fantasy, and that's the same thing that Jim and Kate and Martha were saying, right? It is a choice. You choose how to build your world. You choose the politics and the dynamics and the uh, sort of the structure of your world and how people relate to each other. It is a choice. So if you stick violence against, you make it really violent society, it's your choice. It's
Yep.
because you built it.
Yep.
Uh, yeah. So let's go into geek culture because you've been around. You've been in the science fiction world since 1997, and you've been to a fair few conventions, and and you've watched the whole internet develop and become social media, and how fandoms now move on. They move from just conventions and forum boards, and now everyone's on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and things have changed, kind of.
That's for sure.
And but here's something that still hasn't really changed, right? So geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male dominated, despite a rising number of prominent, well respected, and well known female authors. So I'm just going to pause here to say congratulations to all the authors. I think Nelly Okorafor, N.K. Jemisin, and Rebecca Roanhorst, and Martha Wells, who did so well in the recent Hugos, and they are just four examples of the rise of female authors in science fiction and fantasy. And critics say that it's still too male dominated, and plus there's still plenty of hostile, misogynist, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. I mean, look at Gamergate, and then now we have Comicsgate. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books, more welcoming for women and girls?
Huh, interesting. Because if you ask a lot of people, especially writers my age, who they read when they were younger, they'll often say like Andre Norton. It was in the days when women wrote under names that could be anything, so they were assuming that it's young 15-year-old boys who are reading our stuff. Uh, I actually heard that statistic when my first book came out, so I actually did a survey, and I had 450 people respond, and my readership tends to be women who have at least one university degree, and this was back in '97. So even back then, the reality and what they, publishing or whatever felt was real, they were not together. I mean, it was already changing back then. Um, I think a lot of it is people behaving badly. I mean, let's face it, on both sides. But in terms of the attitude towards women writing science fiction, it's an interesting because I've actually had a convention organizer years back come up to me and say, "I'm so glad you're writing fantasy because I would never have read your science fiction because you're a woman." And I sort of went, "Oh, really? Well, I'm not coming back to your convention either," which probably wasn't my best strategy. But at the time, I just felt very offended by that. But I thought, why? Is it because we tend to write female characters better? I don't know what his reason would have been. Certainly, I was the scientist, and he was not. Ah, it's it's one of those things. I don't know. I think that publishing itself has an awful lot of strong women in it in science fiction and fantasy. I mean, my editor Sheila Gilbert just won her second Hugo. Uh, they've never discriminated against women authors. I would like to know what the booksellers ratio is of male to women, to men to female, because if they're the gatekeepers, they're picking the books to put out, and they're looking for male names. Well, we're screwed there.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is I don't know if you heard about it, but there was a female author, I think a couple of years back, and she did an experiment. She sent the manuscript that she had ready to some agents and publishers under her female name, and nobody bid. But when she sent it under a male nom de plume, they were all like, "Oh, this is brilliant," and all that, and everyone goes, "Now that's why we still do the J.K. Rowling thing with the initials, and our last name and stuff." Do you think it's still? I mean, it's this was a
I'm
couple.
sure it's still out there. I'm sure it is. I'm fortunate that it has not occurred to me, because, as I say, I've dealt with Daw, I've dealt with Tor, I've dealt with Baden, and in all those cases, they were all very much, we're so happy to see you, and it's the work that matters. Uh, I think it's also timing. I mean, now I would be. I think now they'd be really risking a lot to do that. A few years ago, I'm sure they could get away with it. But, I don't know, it's evolving. Certainly, you see a lot of change in biology, it's 50-50 women and men now working in biology and health sciences, uh, pretty much across the board. We still got a long way to go in physics and computer science and other non-traditional areas that women haven't been sought, and that's partly because it's not a welcoming culture yet. You walk in and you're the only woman there, it doesn't feel quite the same. So you got to get two or three in there, and I think what Nora and Nanetti have done have really be helpful.
Yeah, and speaking of science, there was some reports that came out earlier this year about how there's a lot of sexual harassment and workplace harassment of women in science.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
it has, I mean, do you think, I mean, you're a scientist, and, do you think it's gotten better since, you first came out of university and started working in science? Or do
I
you think
think so. I think so. A lot of them are dying.
a lot of them are dying?
Well, it's sort of in the sense of a turnover of generations. We have the generation that was brought up with why are women even working? Barefoot and pregnant is where you belong, in the kitchen. And now we're having a generation of men and women who are brought up with, of course, my mom worked, my dad works. They both have to work. That's the economy. That's what they want to do. So they put up with a lot less of this. You're starting to see it. You see departments where there hasn't been any problem at all, and then all of a sudden one thing happens and everybody's on it because they're they're not so much waiting for it, but they're not going to put up with it anymore. So I think it really is going to be a thing where as enough young people come in and enough of the old guard go, as it were,
Mhm.
naturally. It's got to change because they just won't put up with it anymore. I mean, I'm very proud of my children because they wouldn't watch Popeye cartoons. They came on the TV and they just thought olive oil was the silliest thing ever because she just waved her arms and screamed. They were Buffy kids, you know. Women have to step up and do things. They don't sit back and become victims. And I think that's the best thing we can do really ourselves is not put up with it if we can as best we can.
Yeah, I was a Buffy kid, and
Yes.
I grew up with Buffy. Oh, Anne of Green Gables. I mean, back then,
Yep.
I mean, when L.M. Montgomery wrote her, I can't even. I was actually thinking the other day. I wonder what the reception was when Anne's books first came out. I mean, how did I mean at that time things were still very, things were it was Edwardian, right, at that
Yep.
time, and there was still it was still very sexist era, and I was just wondering the other day. I wonder what the reception was when the Anne books were published, because Anne is the girl who showed so many girls world in Canada and worldwide that it's okay to be yourself. It's okay to be angry and have a temper. It's it's okay to be smart and to show that you're smart. It's totally okay to go to college, no, despite what everyone tells you. And Marilla is also, if you look at her now that I look back on it, not think about it when I was a teen girl, but she's revolutionary. She never got married. She ran the farm together with her brother family. She raised Anne. After Matthew died, continued raising Anne as a single mom. And she did so much with her life. So, it's just
I
we've
think
had these
well,
characters.
I think they did well, and I think part of it was that these were new ideas and exciting, but also because it's never all one thing. Even in a city like say Toronto at that era, there were women moving towards suffragettes. There were female scientists, even though they weren't being acknowledged necessarily. Well, definitely not, or even being paid. But there were other areas in which women were succeeding. And I think those women too, they latch on the books. They show those books to their kids. I mean, it's never been, oh, it's at this particular era, no woman ever spoke out. I think there's always been a bubble of us doing things. And I think I certainly know my mother's family. Uh, all three women were expected to get to be well educated, to work and to do things, and they all enlisted in the war. But when it started, because as teenagers, because you step up and you do work. So I hope that that's a bit. Now of course Anne of Green Gables is such a famous, wonderful series for everybody, and delighted that you mentioned it. Actually,
Um, and let's we're gonna wrap up soon. So you mentioned your kids. You
I
mentioned,
do.
yeah, and your son, and parents are the most influential role models in a person's life. They're literally the first, or parents, as in not necessarily biological, but our main guardians at who raise us. Um, they are the most influential models in a person's life. As a mom yourself, what do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations and to get boys involved in helping to do so?
I think having the conversation is important. I think leading by example is really important. Roger and I have always been partners, both in work and in life, and the kids see that. Uh, they notice that we divide the labor up, and they divide the labor up, and I think they grew up in that environment, and also neither one of us we react strongly to any sense of violence against women or against any weaker person. I think also you just have to sort of look at them and say, are you comfortable with who you are, and how and who you are is what you're going to portray to the world. And I frankly believe that someone who is violent against women or children or animals is someone who is they're not fully themselves. They need something to get to them a point where that's not their reaction to life. So I don't know. I think leading by example has really got to be the best thing. I mean, you can't tell them; you just have to show them. And I think that's if we've done anything right, I think that's probably what it was.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask the last question, which is a captain obvious question, but we ask this of all our authors. You know, you've been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign. Your tweets are so cute. Uh, and are okay, sorry about using the word cute, but they are cute because we've been both of us, both you on Twitter and us on Twitter, we've been tweeting back and forth for the last few weeks, and and you've been so supportive of our anti-violence against women work as a whole. Why do you support the cause to end violence against women, and what do you think authors can do to help bring about cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Okay. And this is also about parenting, because another thing about parenting is choosing the books that you give them. And a lot of the science fiction books that I had that I thought I might interest my kids in, I won't give them now for the reasons that you cite. They're misogynistic, they are shallow characters, they're unreal. And in terms of why I support this, it's if families aren't intact and happy and productive, everything falls apart. If friends can't be friends, if people can't relate to one another without fear, where do we go from there? And I think part of it is you've got to feel secure before you can move forward and be a healthy, happy person. And if you're not doing that, you're not helping anyone around you. So to live to these women that live in fear, is the most horrible thing. I can't even imagine it, and it's anything to do to help that, anything to make that wrong in the eyes of all people, I think would be helpful. And even in the stories that we tell, I mean, you do not need to have rape victims in order to make a character a sympathetic, tough girl. I am sorry. I'm a sympathetic, tough girl, and I've had not had that terrible experience in my life. And I think if you do, I think that's a different story that we should be telling.
Hmm. So that is so true. We could go on and on, but I don't want Google Hangout to cut us off. So I'm gonna put myself on screen because I'm gonna share this little slide that tells everyone where to go get your goodies.
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 Everybody get the goodies.
Hi everybody. Hey Kristen. Hey Anusha. So I'm gonna stick this slide on screen. Da, 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 da. Ah, here we go. Can you see this, Julie?
Yes, I can.
All right. So, as mentioned earlier, and I appear to be echoing again, hopefully not too badly.
Oh,
Uh,
no.
so, Julie has generously donated 3 lovely treats to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels fundraising page. And the first one is a set of the Reunification trilogy plus a set of handmade bookmarks by Julie and her husband, Roger, and a handwritten thank you note from Julie. Now, this reunification trilogy bundle has already been taken by a very generous donor named Michelle Mitchell. And it's going to be win-win because Michelle apparently told Julie, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Michelle's going to donate the books to her local library. So more
I think
people can read it.
I think so. It was a library to a good friend, but they're going to go to another good home.
So what's left? 2 more treats left. First, the first treat left is the first printing hardcover of Julie's latest book, Search Image, featuring the lovable alien Essen. I'm gonna put Julie on screen now, I think.
Because Julie's playing with things.
And the bundle also includes a set of the handmade bookmarks that I mentioned earlier and a handwritten thank you note from Julie. And also, there's a very special Tuckerization perk. Okay, let me put Julie on screen now. Stop. Okay, so Julie's showing look at the lovely bookmarks. Um, and I'm gonna put I'm going to share this again just in case you missed it. I'm going to put the, okay, here we go. I'm going to put the slide back on screen. Now, Julie also has a very special Tuckerization treat. You can name a minor character in Julie's next book, which she mentioned earlier, The Gossamer Mage, which is out in August 2019. And what's really special, there are two really special twists to this particular Tuckerization, which is different from any other Tuckerizations that we've had on Read for Pixels before. One is that you get to choose whether your character is good or evil and how they die, if they die. Julie's making a funny.
Sorry.
And also, you get to tell Julie whether you want your character to have a particular quirk. So, for example, Julie Tuckerized one of her friends before, and he told her that he wanted his character to be someone who couldn't sleep without a chicken nearby. And Julie managed to do that. So, total proof that Julie can incorporate just about any quirk that you could think of. And so here's the slide back on screen. You can go donate to our fundraiser to get these goodies. You go to is.gd/R4P Rally App 2018. It's case sensitive, so make sure you get it all down correctly. And you can find out more about Read for Pixels at is.gd/Read for Pixels. Again, it's case sensitive. And Anusha has probably cut and paste everything into the chat box as well, so you can look there and click there to go to the fundraising page. So I'm going to put myself on screen, and you want to find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, including if you suspect that you have a friend or a family member who's being abused and you have no idea what to do. Go to our website at www.thepixelproject.net. We have lots of lists there that you can use, checklists. We have articles that will introduce you to the different types of violence against women and what you can do about it. And once again, to find out more about the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign, because we are busy revealing the first male role model who's a Nobel laureate, and we are almost at 60,000 pixels revealed, so we have quite a ways to go. So we just need your help there. Every dollar donated reveals one pixel. You can go to http://reveal.thepixelproject.net to learn more about it. And I'm going to put Julie on screen now, because Julie, do you have any announcements you want to make? Anything you're going to soon, well, apart from search images coming out?
Well, sure, yes. I'm going to be at CanCon in Ottawa from the 12th to the 14th. We're having a shenanigans reveal party with Kevin Hearn and Kate Hartwell and Raymond for our books at the convention. And we will definitely be talking about Read for Pixels. And I will also see what I can do about getting that person you're interested in having next year.
Yeah. Oh, and we know Kevin. Kevin's also a Read for Pixels author.
Yes, I thought you'd know the name.
Yeah, so say hi to Kevin for us. And so I'm going to say good night. I'm going to put myself on screen. So good night, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Have a really great day. And thank you so much for joining us today with this chat with Julie Czerneda. And we'll just say bye now and put Julie back on screen. All right.
Oh, I'm back on screen?
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say thank you, Regina and Anusha and all the rest for all this. This has been wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a great week. Okay.